Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Dave Reiser. I live in the Villas with my wife, Jane. And tonight I have the distinct pleasure of introducing a good friend, a fellow churchgoer, and a fellow Emmy Award winner. Oh, please don't laugh. We worked very hard for those. Anyway, the gentleman is Mr. Tim Kurkjian, and you might recognize him as Mr. Baseball in the sporting world. Tim's journey began in Bethesda. He was born at Bethesda. He attended Walter Johnson High School and later graduated from the University of Maryland with a degree in journalism. Baseball has always been in his blood. He was deeply involved in the game for almost 45 years, both as a player in school and as a reporter on major outlets. Most notably, he served as an analyst on ESPN for over 20 years. His dedication to the sport was recognized when he was inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame with Babe Ruth. Not at the same time, though. And that was thanks to the Career Excellence Award from the Baseball Writers Association of America. I believe Tim won 3 Emmys. He's also an accomplished author. His works include America's Game, Is This a Great Game or What? And I'm Fascinated by Sacrifice Flies. I recall a delightful visit that Jane and I had at their home with Tim and his wife, Kathy, up in Darnestown. And during the visit, Tim nudged me and he said, "I want to show you something, Dave, come on." He took me to his den, and it had just been outfitted as a TV studio by ESPN. That's got to be something cool. I think this had to be before Zoom was popular. Tim and Kathy are proud parents of 2 wonderful children, Kelly and Jeff, and they have 4 grandchildren. Jeff, by the way, is a broadcaster in Philadelphia, I believe. Also, Tim, I heard through a grapevine that your favorite drink is Diet Mountain Dew. I don't know the basis of that. If there's a story there, I'd like to hear about it. But I got that from indirectly from your son, Jeff. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I'm honored to introduce to you Mr. Jeff Kurkjian, Mr. Baseball, Jeff Kurkjian. That's the son. Mr. Baseball, Tim Kurkjian.
All right, thanks so much for having me. We'll get the Hall of Fame thing out of the way right off the top, okay? So I get this unbelievable honor, and the call comes while I'm at the Harris Teeter grocery store, and I'm dragging a rotisserie chicken through the self-scanner when I get the call that I am going to the Hall of Fame. And I start to cry right there at the Harris Teeter. The next morning, Johnny Bench, the greatest catcher of all time, calls me on the phone and says, "Tim, welcome to the club. You're one of us now." Now, let's be clear. I'm not one of them. I'm not in that club. I'm a writer. They're the players. There's a really big difference. But that's what he told me. And then his voice got very soft. And Johnny said, "Tim, you know, it's moments like this that take you back to Little League. And I was just about ready to cry again. And he said, and let's face it, you could still fit into a Little League uniform. Thank you, Johnny. Very kind of you. So I got inducted on a Saturday. Sunday is the real induction, and we're going over to see the real players being inducted. I am on the Hall of Fame bus. Me and everyone else on the bus is a Hall of Fame player. It's like, who doesn't belong on this bus? There is one seat open, and it's right next to me. And this very regal, elegant-looking gentleman looks at me and says, can I sit next to you? And it was Sandy Koufax. Now, I knew Sandy not real well, but enough to know that between us, he could be a little prickly if you ask the wrong question. So now I'm thinking, I've got 15 minutes on this bus, and if I ask the wrong question to Sandy Koufax, it might be the most uncomfortable ride of my life. If you don't know, Sandy was a better basketball player in high school than he was a baseball player. So I called an audible, and I asked him, I said, could you dunk it easily when you were in college? And his eyes got about this big, and now he's engaged. And he says, oh, I could dunk it easily. And he looks at me and he goes, look how big my hands are. Sandy Koufax had legendarily big hands. I already knew that. He says, look how long my arms are. I have a 37-inch sleeve. And he said, and I could really jump. I could dunk it easily in college. And we talked about basketball and basketball only for 15 minutes, and he was so charming and so engaging. So for once, I asked the right question at the right time. It was absolutely wonderful. We're going to get to questions later, okay? But there's only one rule. I only know about 3 things in the whole world: baseball, basketball, and sitcoms from the 60s. That's all I know. So don't ask me anything else about religion or geography or science or music or anything, because I am a one-trick pony. But I love baseball. I have loved it my entire life. My father, God bless him, was the greatest baseball fan in the world, and he was a really good player in his day. He also went to MIT undergrad and got his doctorate in mathematics years later. So my love of statistics comes from my father, who showed me where to look in the baseball encyclopedia for important stuff. When I wasn't playing, I was sitting next to my father. And when I was 7 years old, he showed me, look, Joe DiMaggio hit 361 home runs and only struck out 369 times. That's impossible. But I knew that when I was 7, and I used it on our podcast 2 days ago. I mean, it still works because my father taught me how to love the game. He gave me a great feel for the game, and he taught me about the numbers within the game. My 2 brothers, Matt and Andy, are in the Baseball Hall of Fame at Catholic University. My brother Andy might be the best player ever to play there. Baseball was the primary language spoken in my house growing up, and it's what I've loved since I was age 5, as far back as I can remember, and now, 65 years later, I still love it as much as ever. And my dad grew up in Watertown, Mass. His guy, of course, was Ted Williams. So in 1982, having heard all of these stories about Ted Williams, I'm at Fenway Park covering the Texas Rangers for the Dallas Morning News. And we're playing a game at Fenway on Old Timers Day. And out of the dugout comes Ted Williams, who was like 63 years old at the time. He walks right by me. I am absolutely speechless. I don't even know what to do. It's Ted Williams. He takes off his jacket. By now, Fenway Park is absolutely silent, because the great Ted Williams is getting into the cage. He digs into the batter's box exactly the way that I saw him do it on film in 1941. And the first pitch that Ted Williams saw, he hit a line drive that bounced once and went into the bullpen in right center field. It would have been a ground rule double, and I was 10 feet away from this. So after batting practice, I ran upstairs and I said, "Pop, I just saw Ted Williams take batting practice. It was breathtaking. And it was exactly like you told me it would be." This is why I love baseball so much, is that it has such a great history and a tradition. And I don't care what anyone says. If I hear this one more time, I'm going to scream. Ted Williams would be the best hitter in baseball right now if we dropped him into today's game. And yet I have friends of mine who don't think Ted Williams would hit today. He couldn't play in today's game. Are you kidding me? It's Ted Williams we're talking about. Babe Ruth's the same thing. I never saw Babe Ruth take batting practice, but I know this. He's the greatest hitter of all time. He was the best pitcher in the American League in 1919, and then he decided, I'm going to become a hitter now, and he became the greatest hitter of all time. And it drives me crazy that we make movies about Babe Ruth, and they take some big fat guy like John Goodman, who I love, by the way, and he turns Babe Ruth into a cartoon character. Babe Ruth stole 123 bases. He had 136 triples. He was a great defensive right fielder. He's one of the greatest players. He is the greatest player of all time for me. And Bert Hawkins, who used to cover the Senators a million years ago and actually covered Babe Ruth, I asked him in 1982. I said, "Hawk, who's the greatest player you've ever seen?" He looked at me and he chuckled and he said, "Buddy boy, I'll take Babe Ruth and you can have the next three." That's how great Babe Ruth was. And, of course, I went to Walter Johnson High School, named after the greatest pitcher of all time. I played baseball and basketball there. I also wrote for the school paper. It was called The Pitch. I did some work for the yearbook. It was called The Wind-Up. So I made a career out of baseball, having gone to a high school named after the greatest pitcher of all time. And I can't believe I didn't know this, but I just found this out 10 years ago. Walter Johnson died on December 10th, 1946. And I was born on December 10th, 1956. 10 years to the day that Walter Johnson died, I was born. And then I went to his high school. It's like the coolest thing. It's like destiny was involved in my life, that I was going to cover baseball someday because I went to Walter Johnson High School. And the number of people that I have met over the years, mostly the older players that I met, I got such a kick out of meeting. The first time I met Willie Mays, I was told, "You are going to interview Willie Mays and Hank Aaron at the same time." I mean, really, am I going to fall down? I'm scared to death that I'm interviewing the two greatest living players. They were so good. It was so great. And I just kept thinking, my dad is going to watch me interview Hank Aaron and Willie Mays. So years after that, the highlight of my entire career, Hank Aaron comes on TV with us. He's 83 years old, and he does 4 innings on the air of a baseball game that we broadcast. I'm in the booth with Dave Fleming, the play-by-play guy, Eduardo Perez, my dear friend, who is the son of Tony Perez, Hall of Famer, and Hank Aaron is sitting in between us for an hour and a half. I stopped keeping score of the game. I've never done that before because I was so mesmerized by the man sitting next to me. He was so funny. He was so charming. He was so engaging. And his memory was unbelievable. We asked him a million questions, and he remembered times and places and everything. So the game's over, and I checked Twitter. Used to be called Twitter, okay? By the way, never a good idea to check Twitter after you've just broadcast a Major League game, because there's no telling who's gonna write in. That was the worst thing I've ever heard in my life. But some guy writes in. He says, if anyone ever looks at you like Tim Kirkjian looked at Hank Aaron tonight, you should marry that person. That's how much I loved Hank Aaron. And let me tell you how revered he was. One of my teammates at ESPN, one of my favorite teammates, was Aaron Boone, who is, of course, the Yankees manager now. So at the All-Star game in Minneapolis in 2014, I see Booney. He just gets off the elevator. Now, keep in mind, Aaron Boone can talk to anybody. His grandfather played in the major leagues. His father played in the major leagues, and his brother played in the major leagues. There isn't anybody that Aaron Boone cannot speak to. He gets off the elevator. He looks at me. His face is white. And I said, what? He goes, you're not going to believe who was in the elevator with me. I said, who? He said, Hank Aaron. And I said, well, what did you say to him? He said, I couldn't even speak. I couldn't even say a word. I said, why? He said, because it's Hank Aaron. This is what our greatest players do to people. They are so revered, they are so heroic, they are so historic that they take men who have never had a problem speaking and make them speechless. That's what Hank Aaron did. And Paul Molitor, Hall of Fame player, by the way, told me once that he went to a banquet that included only former batting champions in the major leagues. So it's a pretty high-level group. He walks into the meeting, and he sees Ted Williams talking to Joe DiMaggio in the corner. And like, Paul Molitor doesn't know what to do. Immediately, Ted Williams blows off Joe DiMaggio, runs over to Paul Molitor and says, God, I'd love to watch you hit. Okay, when the count is 2-0, what kind of pitch are you looking for? And Paul Molitor is like, oh my God, I just watched Ted Williams blow off Joe DiMaggio to come speak to me. And he said, I didn't even know what to say. I made absolutely no sense because I was so in awe that Ted Williams would want to talk to me. 99 All-Star game at Boston. One of the great days of my entire life. And I've been to every All-Star game since 1981. So they honored Ted Williams that night as the greatest hitter ever. And they wheeled him out in his wheelchair. And the players were literally afraid to go talk to Ted Williams because he's Ted Williams. So typically, no surprise here, Cal Ripken and Tony Gwynn, two guys who always got it, always understood where they were and how to do things, talked the rest of the players and gathered around Ted Williams and asked him a bunch of questions. So that night, Pedro Martinez, one of the greatest pitchers I've ever seen, was absolutely overwhelming. He was so good in the 2 innings he pitched. After his 2 innings in the All-Star game, he goes into the clubhouse, and Ted Williams is in the clubhouse. And he looks at Pedro and he said, that's some of the greatest stuff I have ever seen in my life. And Pedro Martinez, to this day, calls that the highlight of his major league career, that Ted Williams came up to him and told him how great a pitcher he was. But Ted, of course, was very difficult to deal with because he was John Wayne. He was bigger than life. So years ago, after the Hall of Fame induction, all the Hall of Famers were asked to stick around and sit at a table, and any media member could go sit at your table and ask a bunch of questions. So Ted is sitting there, and 5 different writers go and sit down next to him at his table. And nobody says a word for 1 minute. And Ted looks at the writers and says, "Scared to death, aren't you?" That's who Ted Williams was. He was tough, he was rough, but boy, he was a great player. There were so many great players that I've met along the way. Please, I'm dropping names here. I went to a luncheon at the White House years ago when George W. Bush was the owner of the Rangers. When I lived in Dallas, I saw him at the ballpark all the time. I got to know him pretty well. So when he had a baseball night, he had 3 of them at the White House, I got invited. And it was assigned seating at the White House. And I am sitting in between Stan Musial and Brooks Robinson. And I can say without hesitation, they are the 2 kindest men that I have ever seen wear a major league uniform. Never mind how great they were. And I get to sit between those 2 guys. So halfway through lunch, Stan Musial looks at me and he goes, "Would you like an autographed picture of me?" Now, I don't keep autographs. I don't have any autographs. I don't have any memorabilia. I'm not allowed to keep that stuff. I'm a baseball writer. I have to remain objective. No autographs, none of that. But when Stan Musial says to you, "Would you like an autographed picture?" Of course you say yes. It shows up 2 days later at my house. And of course, I write this really nice note to Stan Musial. "Thank you so much for the incredibly generous gift." I saw him 2 years later, and he looks at me and he goes, "How'd you like the picture?" Not only did he remember that this dinky little sports writer got a picture from him 2 years earlier, he brought it up the next time that he saw me. And Brooks Robinson, oh, please don't start me on Brooks Robinson. It'll make me cry. Brooks Robinson is so good, was so good. He's the greatest defensive third baseman of all time. We already know that. He is so kind. When I first started covering baseball, I was like 22 years old. I loved the game. I knew what I was doing, but I had no idea how to cover the game because I was just too young. Brooks Robinson put his arm around me, and he doesn't even know who I am, but he sees I'm writing and I'm a worker. He puts his arm around me and says, "If you ever need anything, you just let me know." Brooks Robinson did that to me. So when he retired in 1977, they had a big retirement party for Brooks, and one of my friends, Gordon Beard, made a speech about Brooks Robinson. This is 1977. And he said, in New York, they named a candy bar after Reggie Jackson, which you might remember. There was something called the Reggie Bar. So Gordon Beard said, in New York, they named a candy bar after Reggie Jackson. Here in Baltimore, we name our children after Brooks Robinson. And it's true. So like 5 years ago, I'm not making this up, I go to some aquarium on a trip to Florida with the kids and grandkids and everything else, and I was there for like 5 hours, and somehow there were 1 million baseball fans. A whole bunch of them recognized me because I'm on TV every single day, and 5 people that I met in 5 hours named a child after Brooks Robinson. It's just unbelievable. And I wrote this once, and it probably has changed, but at one point, 27 different teammates of Nolan Ryan named their son after Nolan Ryan. 27. Nolan Ryan is the greatest power pitcher of all time. No one's ever thrown harder for a longer period than him. He's the hardest pitcher to hit in Major League history. And I can tell you again, one of the kindest, nicest people in the world. So Rance Mulliniks, who used to play for the Blue Jays many years ago, was once asked, what would the world be like if everyone was like Nolan Ryan? And Rance Mulliniks said, everyone would love each other and no one would get a hit. So here's how great Nolan Ryan was. He was a power pitcher from the beginning right to the end. And he only retired because he finally got hurt after all those years. So at age 65, he's throwing out the first ball at a Rangers game. Now it's Nolan Ryan. As we should have guessed, he got loose underneath the stadium, throwing as hard as he could underneath the stadium to get ready for his ceremonial first pitch. And of course, the scouts all had their radar guns out. 65 years old, he threw 85 miles an hour, which if you're not sure anymore what 85 is, trust me, that is bringing it. So the catcher for the ceremonial first pitch was Jim Sundberg, who won 6 Gold Gloves for catching excellence. But he doesn't realize that Nolan is going to throw that hard, and of course he sees it coming, and he panics, and he has to crouch down just to catch it, and he told me, I split my pants. So he had to walk off the field with split pants because Nolan Ryan did that to him. This is why I've loved my job for so long, is I have gotten to meet all of these people who have treated me so well, have taught me so well. Frank Robinson, oh my gosh, Frank Robinson, the most ferocious hitter that I have ever met. And I got to know him really, really well as the manager of the Orioles, a coach at one point, and I even covered him briefly when he was a player. And there was nobody quite like Frank Robinson. So on opening day 75 in Cleveland, this is the only Frank Robinson story you need to hear. He is the player manager, and he's the first black man ever to manage a game in the major leagues. So it's historic. So he doesn't put himself in the lineup, even though he's the player manager. So Phil Segui, the general manager, comes down and says, Frank, you have to play today. This is your day. So Frank puts himself in the order, batting number 2 in the bottom of the first inning. He's facing Doc Medich, pardon my language here, he's facing Doc Medich, who gets ahead of him 0-2. And then Doc Medich throws him a nasty slider on the outside part of the plate, and Frank just lays off of it. But Frank says to himself, and told me years later, this son of a bitch is trying to strike me out on 3 pitches on my day. Nobody does that to me. And he hit the next pitch over the left center field fence for a home run. That is Frank Robinson. Most ferocious hitter I've ever seen. The most ferocious pitcher I've ever met is Bob Gibson. I was literally afraid to talk to Bob Gibson because I thought he might knock me down if I asked the wrong question. But here's how great Bob Gibson was. So Johnny Bench, the guy who called me at the Harris Teeter, told me while he was growing up, everybody knew he was going to the big leagues early. So he's like 18 years old. So he's going to the big leagues in the next couple years. And while he's watching games as a high school kid at home, his dad, who was a really good player in his day, but not a major leaguer, used to always say, while they're watching a game, I could hit that guy. You know, Juan Marichal, I could hit that guy. Don Drysdale, I could hit that guy. You know, and Johnny's going, yeah, Dad, right, you could hit those guys that are in the big leagues. So Johnny goes to the big leagues at age 19. He invites his mom and dad to come to the game, and they're playing the Cardinals. And Bob Gibson strikes him out first at bat, strikes him out the second at bat, and then strikes him out the third at bat. Johnny walks back to the dugout, and he's literally laughing after striking out 3 times in a major league game. And Dave Bristol, his crusty old manager, looks at him and says, what is so funny? You just struck out for the 3rd time. And Johnny goes, my dad could never hit that guy. That's how great Bob Gibson was. And I got to see so many of these guys. Gibson's teammate, Lou Brock. Oh my gosh. I can't believe what a kind man he is. My son Jeffrey and I, Jeffrey's now 32, and we do a podcast together. When he was 10, I took him to Cooperstown, and we go in the golf shop just walking around, and Lou Brock is in the golf shop. One of the great base stealers of all time, one of the great postseason players of all time, a sure first ballot Hall of Famer. He meets my son Jeffrey, and he gives him 20 minutes. A grown man speaks 20 minutes to my son Jeff, and he says to him, he goes, "You have a beautiful smile. We don't smile enough in today's world. You need to use that smile as often as you can, because nothing disarms a person faster than a great smile." That's what Lou Brock told my son when he was 10 years old. And these are the stories that I will never forget for the rest of my life. And I don't, like I said, I have no autographs, I have no memorabilia, it's off, I can't do that. All my stories are right up here. And I'm not gonna forget any of them, God forbid, unless I get way too old. But so, I could go on, but my favorite part of things like this are when the audience gets involved. So you can ask me anything that you want. Like I said, however, if you want a legitimate answer, it better be about baseball or basketball or sitcoms from the 60s. Otherwise, I simply don't know the answer. But I do this with 7-year-old kids. I do this with 90-year-old people. And the questions are always the best part. So just raise your hand. I'll do my very, very best to answer whatever question you ask. I've been a voter for the Hall of Fame for 35 years. I have covered every World Series game since 1981, every All-Star game since 1981. I have met virtually every great player from the last 50 years. It has been an honor I can't even begin to tell you about. So if you have a favorite player, if you have a favorite story, if you have any question, fire away, and Dave Reiser will take care of this.
Willie Stargell.
Oh my gosh, Willie Stargell. Pops, Willie Stargell. This is so sad. I grew up watching Willie Stargell, of course, 79 Pirates, 71 Pirates. Oh my gosh, he was so good, so gregarious, so hilarious. And this is so bad. The day that PNC Park opened in Pittsburgh, the first time I ever went there was the first game they ever played there. My cab arrives at the ballpark, and the news broke at 8 o'clock in the morning that Willie Stargell had died. And I just came to tears in my first trip to PNC Park in Pittsburgh. He was so big, he was so strong. He hit balls to places that almost no one has ever done, ever. But it was his effusive personality that kept that Pirates team afloat. Everybody loved Willie Stargell, including me. Yes.
Did you ever meet Satchel Paige?
The question is, did I ever meet Satchel Paige? The answer is no, I never met Satchel Paige. I'm old, I'm not that old. Unfortunately, because Satchel Paige was like almost nobody that we've ever seen. Willie Mays tells the story that he faced Satchel Paige in a barnstorming game, and he hit a double off of Satchel Paige. And Satchel says, when Willie is coming up again, he said, "Little boy," I'm just quoting here, "little boy, you come to the plate, I'm gonna throw you 3 fastballs, you're gonna swing and miss at all 3 of them." And Willie goes to himself, "I just hit a double off this guy. I don't think he's gonna strike me out on 3 pitches. And of course, Satchel Paige, 1, 2, 3, swings and misses, struck out the great Willie Mays. So the players in the Negro Leagues were so good. And finally, we've got their statistics into Major League Baseball now. Josh Gibson's numbers as a catcher, unbelievable Oscar Charleston. Oscar Charleston is one of the greatest players of all time, and Satchel Paige is a pitcher that we've never seen before. And if he pitched today in his prime, he would win 25 games. I have no doubt about that.
Roberto Clemente.
Oh my gosh, Roberto Clemente. So I was, 72, I was 15 years old. And on New Year's Day, my father walked down from upstairs and he was crying. I didn't see my father cry too many times. And I said, Pop, what? He said, Roberto Clemente died in a plane crash last night. Oh my gosh. I saw Roberto Clemente play in person, sadly, only one time. And that's when the Pirates, after winning the World Series in '71, played an exhibition game here against the Orioles at RFK Stadium. So I got to watch Roberto Clemente in his prime. And all I wanted to see, well, I needed to see two things. I needed to see him hit a line drive single to right field, because nobody hit a line drive single harder to right field than Roberto Clemente. And I said, and I have to watch him throw. He made a throw in that game that I will never forget for the rest of my life. And that throw he's made 10 million times, but that day I was there. And I said, please, just let me see him hit a rocket to right and let me see him throw. And Roberto Clemente came through with both of those and then died a hero. So no matter what you hear about Roberto Clemente, you can multiply it by about 10, and that's how great he was. And on our podcast, I almost got killed. I almost got killed on our podcast. I named the greatest players of all time from number 1 to number 55. I called it from Ozzie to Oral. That's Ozzie Smith to Oral Hershiser. So we get to number 21. And the candidates for the greatest number 21 of all time are Roberto Clemente and Warren Spahn. Warren Spahn won 363 games. He completed almost as many games in his 40s as Curt Schilling, a warrior during his time, did in his entire career. Warren Spahn was on the bridge at Remagen. He didn't pitch in the big leagues until he was 25 years old, and he won 363 games. So I picked Warren Spahn as the greatest number 21, and there are people in Pittsburgh that will never speak to me again because I picked somebody over Roberto Clemente. The point is, there are so many great players out there, and Clemente was certainly one of them.
What was the best World Series you've ever seen in your life?
What was the best World Series I've ever seen? Boy, oh boy. It was the 1991 World Series, which Jack Morris pitched a 1-0 shutout in 10 innings in Game 7 to beat the Braves. Second on that list was 2001, when the Diamondbacks came back and beat the Yankees and Mariano Rivera. And this is very unlike me, but the 2025 World Series was the greatest World Series I've ever seen. Game 3 went 18 innings. It was unbelievable. And by the way, not bragging here, we've had 5 postseason games in history that lasted 18 innings. And I covered 4 of the 5. So Game 3 was amazing. Game 6 ended in a way, in a double play that I've never seen, because it's never happened in a postseason game, end like that. And then we had this unbelievably great Game 7. So as much as I love the history of the game, what the Blue Jays and the Dodgers did with all the storylines and everything else, that's the greatest World Series that I've ever seen. And to be almost 70 years old and put anything over 91 or 2001. Now, however, I did not cover the 1960 World Series, which Bill Mazeroski, of course, won with the most famous home run of all time. And we all understand how many strikeouts there are in the game today. Way too many. We average 18 strikeouts per game. In Game 7 of the 1960 World Series, there were 0 strikeouts. The final score was 10-9. The Pirates beat the Yankees, and there were no strikeouts in that game. So an impossible question, but this is one reason why baseball is the greatest and one reason why this World Series was so great. Ernie Clement, this dinky little second baseman, third baseman, who got released by the terrible Oakland A's 4 years ago. They just said, you stink, you can get out of here. He got 30 hits in the postseason. That's the most of any player in one postseason ever. But I was standing with him early on in the playoffs, and he's wearing this really old glove. And I love gloves. I could talk for hours about gloves. I won't, but I could. So I look at Ernie Clement's glove, and I say, Ernie, is that your game glove? Do you wear that in the game? He goes, oh, yeah, this is my gamer. I said, where did you get that? He goes, I bought it on eBay. One of the great defensive players in the game bought his game glove on eBay from a little Japanese woman. How about that? How can that story happen? LeBron James never tells a story like that. I don't think Bill Russell, and I love basketball, ever could tell a story like that. That's why baseball is the most beautiful game ever.
How do you feel about the steroids?
Okay.
How do you feel about the steroid era players like Roger Clemens, Barry Bonds, Sammy Sosa, especially regarding the Hall of Fame?
Right. Okay, the question was, if you didn't hear it, sorry, is what do I think about the steroid era Hall of Fame balloting? I've been a voter for 35 years. This is by far the thorniest, hardest issue that I have ever had to deal with. So I voted for Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens, not with great pride, but I voted for them because one is the greatest hitter I've ever seen, because I didn't see Ted Williams and I didn't see Babe Ruth. And Roger Clemens is arguably the greatest pitcher, other than Walter Johnson, that anyone has ever seen. But clearly, both of them cheated in some form or another. I'm going to try to make my case here with the understanding there is no chance that I'm right about this, because there are no more right answers. This is the problem that baseball has taken, thrown this problem into the laps of the writers like me, and said, you guys figure out what to do with this. Well, we're not good enough. I voted for Bonds and Clemens, no pride in that, because to me, there was this tacit agreement in Major League Baseball back then that we're not testing, we're not checking, we're not penalizing, it's not illegal, everyone's doing it, the manager wants you to do it, the trainer encourages you to do it. I think a lot of people would have done it in order to improve their careers, but clearly they cheated. So what are we going to do now? I don't know what to do with this. And I'm not really comfortable being the moral arbiter of things here. I mean, first off, I can't believe Pete Rose's name hasn't come up yet. When I do these things, he's always the first name that comes up. What are we going to do with Pete Rose? Well, I'll get to that in a minute. The point is, the steroid era still is the foggiest, strangest, and most difficult thing that I've had to deal with. And I don't know what to do with it. And someday, I think Bonds and Clemens might get in the Hall of Fame, but we're not sure about that. And now Pete Rose has been given a path to get into the Hall of Fame. And in 2 years, he's going to go on a special ballot, not a ballot where the writers can vote, but there are going to be 16 people in the room. He's going to have to get 12 out of 16 votes at 75%. Otherwise, he's not getting in. And I'm telling you right now, I don't see Pete Rose getting in the Hall of Fame. I told you about Frank Robinson, who I adored. And Frank Robinson liked me. But I said on TV once, national TV, that if Pete Rose were on the ballot, I would vote for him for the Hall of Fame. It's a difficult decision, but I said, yes, I would. I saw Frank Robinson 3 days later, and he came up and got right in my face and started screaming at me. I said, what are you so mad about? He said, I can't believe you said that you would vote for that guy for the Hall of Fame. He violated the #1 rule in baseball. You do not bet on the games. And Frank told me, if Pete Rose ever gets in the Hall of Fame, I will never go back to Cooperstown for any event ever if I'm going to be in the same club as him. That's how strong people felt about that. Mel Didier was a scout friend of mine, much, much older than me at the time. He told me, Timmy, if Pete Rose had killed a man, it would be less of a violation than what he did. I said, Mel, you've got to be kidding me. He said, Timmy, you weren't around for the aftermath of the Black Sox scandal. If we're not sure whether the game is on the up and up, whether guys are trying to win or not, none of this matters. If the competition isn't pure, then nothing else matters. So Pete Rose still, I believe, has a long road to get into the Hall of Fame. But this is the only Pete Rose story that you'll need, and there's a bad word in it. I apologize in advance. Pete Rose went to prison for 4 months for tax evasion. He was 51 years old. The day he gets out, his son picks him up at the prison. And the first thing Pete Rose says to his son is there a batting cage near here? And the son goes, yeah, there's one right down the street. So the first thing he does after being incarcerated for 4 months is he goes to the batting cage. He goes to the proprietor and says, what's the fastest machine you have here? And the proprietor goes, right there, 85 miles an hour. And that is moving, believe me. So Pete Rose steps in the batting cage. Now everyone at the batting cage recognizes the all-time hit king is in the batting cage. The first pitch comes in, and Pete Rose hits a line drive right back at the pitching machine. An absolute textbook swing. Pete looks at all the people surrounding him. He takes his bat, he throws it to the ground, and he says, some things never fucking change. And then he walks away. That was it. So you don't have to love Pete Rose, but you have to admire how great a player he was and how much he loved being Pete Rose.
How about Al Kaline?
I cut my teeth watching baseball, Whitey Ford, Warren Spahn, and one of the things that has struck me is the way pitching has changed during my lifetime in baseball. I mean, the lack of complete games, the speeds with it, and so on and so on. Your comments about those developments?
Okay, I'm almost 70, as I said multiple times. I grew up in an era where Jim Palmer is facing Sandy Koufax in the '66 World Series, where Denny McLain, a 31-game winner, is facing Bob Gibson in Game 1 of the World Series. That's what the game was about. Two great starting pitchers who were not coming out of the game until the game was over. Speaking of Bob Gibson, 1968, here he had a 1.12 ERA. He had 34 starts. He completed 28 of them. And the 6 games that he did not complete, he was removed in between innings for a pinch hitter, meaning not once that entire season did the manager come to the mound and said, Bob, give me the ball. I'm taking you out of the game. Now, our pitchers, because the industry has trained them to be this way, after 5 innings or 100 pitches, they're looking in the dugout saying, when are you going to come get me? This is a really bad development for the game. Because these guys like Paul Skeens and Tarek Skubal, who are amazing pitchers, want to pitch the whole game, and the industry will not let them because they don't want them to get hurt. Well, the more we protect our pitchers and our players, the more they get hurt anyway. It's a paradox. The more we protect them, the more often they get hurt. It's a really bad thing for the game that we don't let our pitchers be great anymore. We don't allow them to pitch 7, 8, 9 innings in a major league game, especially in the postseason. And so Max Scherzer, we love Max Scherzer, all-time warrior, really tough, rough, tough guy. He has fewer complete games, 12, in his career than Bob Gibson had shutouts, 13, in the 1968 season. So we look at Max Scherzer, who we love, and say, what a warrior that guy is. He has 12 complete games in his career. And Warren Spahn, he completed 20, 30 all the time because that's what guys did back then. Famously, Warren Spahn and Juan Marichal pitched a 16-inning game, and neither one of them came out of the game. And Marichal was like 15 years younger than Warren Spahn, and he says to his manager, I ain't coming out of this game until that old guy comes out of the game. And Warren Spahn never did. This is a really bad development in baseball, and we have to get back to valuing our starting pitchers. We've gotten so far away from it, it drives me crazy. Al Kaline is one of the great gentlemen of all time. Al Kaline told me once, Hall of Fame outfielder for the Tigers, after Ty Cobb, I believe, is the greatest Detroit Tiger ever after Ty Cobb. Al Kaline told me he was a better basketball player in high school than he was a baseball player. And he won a batting championship in the American League when he was 20 years old. Nobody played the game better than Al Kaline did as far as doing everything right. As far as the greatest defensive right fielders of all time, for me, Roberto Clemente is number 1, and Al Kaline is number 2. Of all the greatest throwing outfielders I've ever seen, Clemente is number 1. Certainly Al Kaline is in the top 5. And nobody carried himself better than Al Kaline when it came to being a professional. So a few years ago, this is why Twitter is so bad, and this is why people are so bad. I'm sorry. I like the concept of people, but people really screw it up sometimes. So I'm on the air. I'm doing a playoff game between the Astros and the Tigers. And I bring up the point that on this date in baseball history, Al Kaline announced his retirement. He played for the Tigers. He's the second greatest player in the history. After the game, I checked Twitter. I repeat, never a good idea to check Twitter after the game. This guy writes it. And I talked about Al Kaline for maybe 15 seconds. Al Kaline retired on this date, one of the greatest Tigers ever. We just need to acknowledge that since the Tigers are playing in this game. This guy writes in, he goes, you ruined the game tonight for me, listening to your broadcast. Why in the world would I care who Al Kaline is? You ruined the broadcast by throwing that in the middle of the game. You've got to be kidding me. It's Al Kaline. So yes, whatever you hear about him, multiply it by 10, that's how great Al Kaline was.
22 years in Detroit.
Yes.
And he was, I understand, one of the first guys to break $100,000. Is that correct?
That is correct. Al Kaline made $100,000. I just saw something the other day. Stan Musial had a bad year. So he went into the general manager and said, you got to cut my pay. I had a bad year. So he went from $100,000 down to $80,000 because he said, I didn't deserve $100,000. Stan Musial, who, by the way, had exactly as many hits at home, 18-15, as he did on the road in his major league career. So again, most underrated superstar player ever is Stan Musial to me.
What do you think of Shohei Ohtani? Is he as good as some of these players you've mentioned, or is the hype because he's a two-way player so unusual today?
That's a great question. I have to be careful with this. He is the most remarkable player that has ever played Major League Baseball. I still, however, cannot call him the greatest player ever, because what he's done so far, as amazing as it has been, Babe Ruth essentially did most of that for 20 years, and Ohtani's done it for 8, and it has been unbelievable to watch. And in his defense, Babe Ruth was a great hitter, great pitcher, but Babe Ruth didn't throw 100 miles an hour like Shohei Ohtani. And he didn't hit pitches that came in at 100 miles an hour. And his exit velocity, ball off the bat, I'm not sure Babe hit too many balls at 100 miles an hour. So we've never seen anybody like Shohei Ohtani. And when he went to the Dodgers, I asked one of the Dodger coaches, I said, all right, you've seen Ohtani now for 3 weeks in spring training. I said, what do you think? He goes, he's amazing. Every move he makes on the baseball field is surgical. That's the word he used. Every swing, every throw, every run, everything he does is designed to make him the best player that most people have ever seen. He is a baseball machine. He is a robot. And years ago, when he was pitching for the Angels, his manager, Phil Nevin, told me the story that they were playing an 11 a.m. game in Boston. No game in the Major League starts before noon, but that day, Patriots Day, they start a game at 11. So Phil Nevin goes to Shohei and says, do you think you can pitch that game? And Shohei puts it in his computer brain and says, yeah, I can pitch that game. Here's what I'll do. I'll just go to bed at 7 o'clock the night before, and that way I'll still get my 12 hours sleep, and I'll be able to pitch that game. Phil Nevin looks at me and goes, Tim, I don't know about you, but I can't just go to sleep at 7 o'clock at night and sleep for 12 hours. Shohei even sleeps better than everyone else. That's how great he is.
What do you think of the ghost runner?
I'll get to that. We have 2 questions.
Okay.
But we're going to take the mic, and then I'll answer yours.
Here's the question. You know how much our Nats need support here in our city. What will the folding of the sports pages in the Post do to their ability to develop and come back, sometime in our lifetime with a team that can win?
Well, I kind of made this clear. I'm an old newspaper guy at heart, and it nearly killed me that the Post got rid of its sports section. So many dear friends of mine who write for the Post no longer have a job. And it's so interesting you would bring that up, because my wife, who is really smart and reads the Post every day, sent me a note today, should we cancel the newspaper? The Washington Post nearly killed me. So yes, the Post, what's happened to that? We need to get a better team here. The Nationals have a long way to go, and it's just not helping fans, not helping anyone that a great newspaper no longer has a sports section. All right, last question was about the Ghost Runner. Now you got me really mad, okay? All right, so when I was a kid, and you were like me, we played with 5 guys on a team. So we had to use ghost runners. We had what we call pitcher's hand, right field's closed, because we didn't have 9 players. I think it's the stupidest thing that I've ever seen Major League Baseball do, is put a runner at second base to start the 10th inning of a tie game. I think it's the worst idea. I hope they get rid of it. And yet, I am astonished how many people love the ghost runner, because it gets the game over earlier than, I told you I covered 4 playoff games that lasted 18 innings. They were like the greatest games I've ever seen. But now the games are almost have to end after 10 or 11 because we've got a ghost runner. I'll just finish with this. Pedro Martinez, who I've acknowledged is one of the greatest pitchers ever. He pitched a perfect game through 9 innings about 30 years ago. But the score was tied, so he went into the 10th inning in a scoreless game, and he hadn't allowed a base runner. He had 27 batters up, 27 down. Just imagine, I know it's astronomical odds. What if that happened today? And Pedro Martinez goes out in the top of the 10th inning, having faced 27 batters, retired all of them. But now there's a guy on second base. The first guy bunts him to third, 1 out. Next guy hits the fly ball, gets him in, 2 outs. Pedro strikes out the third guy. He retires all 30 batters that he faced, and he doesn't get credit for a perfect game, and he doesn't even get credit for a win because he lost 1-0. Please, we have to get rid of the ghost runner. Your questions were so good tonight. Thank you so much for having me. That was a blast. And thank you for the Giant Mountain Dew. I only have one vice in my life, and this is it. I've had like 2 cups of coffee in my whole life. I drink one of these and read the box scores in the morning.